The Angular team has been putting out release candidates of Angular 16 for a few weeks now. I've been looking through the releases to see what features may be coming our way, and I've put together a list of the top 3 features that I'm most excited about. The first one is the ability to bind query parameters to a component's input. Let's take a look at how this works before Angular 16. First, we'll need a route. We'll call ours route 1. We're going to listen for a name specifically. To do that, we'll need an observable called name. Then we'll inject the activated route into the constructor and use the map pipe on the query params to grab the name. Then we just need to use the async pipe in our template to subscribe to the name. In our app component, we're going to inject the router in the constructor and create a method to take us to route 1 and insert the name in the query params. We can use a simple button in our template along with the router outlet to display the route. If we go to the browser, we can see the name does indeed display as intended. That was a lot of code for little payoff. Let's clean this up with Angular 16. Before we rewrite this, we have to turn the feature on. All we have to do is add bind to component inputs to the router module. Then we can rewrite route 1 with a simple one-liner. We can remove almost all the code we wrote before and add an input decorator to the name variable. That's it. We can go to the browser and verify that everything still works just like it did before. Angular 16 is going to include signals. You may be wondering what signals are. Basically, signals provide us with a new way for Angular to do change detection. Let's look at an example of change detection using RxJS, and then we can go through the same example with signals. We're going to create a counter with a behavior subject set to 0. Then we'll create an add method and a subtract method using the RxJS next function on the behavior subject. And for the display, we'll simply create a heading and 2 buttons for each method. If we open our app in the browser, we can see that everything functions just as it should. Now let's change this example to work with signals. The first thing we're going to do is change the behavior subject to a signal. Then, instead of the next function, we'll use signal's update function for the add and subtract methods. Lastly, we're going to call count as a method in our template. We can open up the browser again and see that everything still works in exactly the same way. Why is this so important? Up until now, Angular's change detection system has relied on Zone.js. To detect changes, Zone.js starts at the root component and traverses all the components until it finds the one that triggered the change. This can make scaling your application rather difficult. The good news is that the Angular team is beginning to completely phase out Zone.js and replace it with signals. This is good for us because unlike Zone.js, signals are lightweight and incredibly fast, which will give larger apps a nice speed boost. The last feature we're going to talk about is required component inputs. If you've ever spent a lot of time debugging your code, only to find that it was a missed component input causing your whole app to crash, you're in luck because that'll be changing. In Angular 16, we have a new way to ensure that a component's input is required and will actually fail at compile time. It also gives us an actual descriptive error message. Pre-Angular 16, we would have to write a few lines of code to ensure that a missing input would cause an error message. Luckily, Angular 16 makes this pretty easy. Let's see how this works pre-Angular 16 with a button component. We're going to use a simple string as an input, and then we're going to use the onInit lifecycle method to check if the input is there and throw an error if it isn't. This will fail at runtime, which isn't really ideal. To implement required inputs, we can get rid of the onInit lifecycle method and add required true to the input. One thing I wanted to mention is that in VS Code, I got this error, and we'll see another one, but the code still compiles just fine. That being said, let's implement our button in our app component without the required input parameter. And you can see that we do indeed get a nice error message from the compiler. We can even try to pass an incorrect type, so we'll give it a number instead of a string, and we'll still get an error message telling us that this is incorrect. So let's put in a string, and we can see that it does indeed compile. We can even go to the browser and see our button working. So that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I've got a lot more content coming.